Hello, relatives. We are waiting on two of our panelists, so give us a couple of moments as we wait for our other speakers to join, and apologies for the late start. We, again, are waiting for two of our speakers, so give us a couple of moments and we will get started soon. Thank you. Okay, Len, I don't see you. Hold on. Hey, Doug, do you see Len in the waiting room trying to enter perhaps? He says he's on.
I'll check 1 sec. There he is. He's promoted to panelist.
Okay, excellent. Yay. Hi,
Awesome.
Len.
Hi.
We did it.
Oh, let me adjust the lighting really quick. Okay.
No worries. Good evening, relatives. We are waiting for one more speaker. However, she may be joining us late. She does have some business to attend to in her community. And so we will be inviting her as she logs in a little bit late this evening. So thank you all for your patience. We did have a couple of delays getting logged in, so thank you. I want to give us a couple more minutes to get situated and then we will get started here shortly. Thank you all for tuning in this evening. And so, oops. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Good evening, relatives. Thank you for tuning in this evening. I want us all to recognize that wherever you may be tuning in from on Turtle Island, that we are on native land and we predate so-called America. Thank you. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. This session is being recorded. A link of the recording will be shared to our websites. This session is also being streamed Facebook Live for those of you watching on Facebook. We will try to do our best to check in on questions and comments. However, we have approximately 1 hour and we have a lot of topics to cover, so we may not get to your questions. All attendees are on mute and you are not on display. You may submit your questions through the Q&A function. And again, we will save those questions and put them in a parking lot and follow up with them afterwards. You may register for our last teach-in session at Native Perspectives, bit.ly Native Perspectives Uranium. Thank you. I would like to introduce myself and the panelists before we get started this evening. She'eya Talia Boyd and she, Torich Eatney and Shle, Toy Higlini Bashichin, Ashcha Deshachedo, Tabahan Deshanella, Hat Audina Essa and Shle. Good evening, relatives. I was born and raised on the Great Diné Nation. My name is Talia Boyd, and I'm also the mother and a community organizer and the Cultural Landscapes Program Manager for the Grand Canyon Trust. Thank you all for joining us this evening. I would like to again welcome our panelists this evening. I would like to introduce Dr. Len Necefer. He is an assistant professor with joint appointments at the American Indian Studies Program and the Udall Center for Public Policy. In addition, he is a founder and CEO of Colorado-based outdoor apparel company, Native Outdoors. He holds a bachelor's of science in mechanical engineering from the University of Kansas and a doctorate from Carnegie Mellon University Department of Engineering and Public Policy. Previously, he worked at the NASA Glenn Research Center in Cleveland, Ohio, on supersonic vehicle research, and most recently worked for the Department of Energy's Office of Indian Energy Policy and Programs, supporting tribes realize their energy futures through research and grant making. His research focuses on the intersections of Indigenous people and natural resource management policy. This has included work from energy and water issues in the lower 48 and Alaska to outdoor recreation management. Hi, Ophelia. Thank you for joining us.
Hi.
In his spare time, Len is an avid outdoor adventurer, using rock, ice climbing, high altitude and ski mountaineering, and bike packing to convey stories focused on environmental activism and Indigenous history. These adventures are documented in his writing and photography, which has been featured in the Alpinist, Outside Magazine, the Climbing Zine, Beside Magazine, Patagonia's The Cleanest Line, and various film festivals. Thank you so much for joining us this evening, Dr. Necefer.
Glad to be here.
Thank you. Next, I would like to introduce Melisa Laelan. Melisa is native of the Marshall Islands, born and raised in the capital city of Mahuro. Sorry if I mispronounced that. At age 17, she decided to leave the islands to enlist in the United States Armed Forces. Her career in the Army required her to travel globally, which gave her the firsthand exposure to other cultures. It was then that she found her interest in working with people from different walks of life. After 10 years of serving in the armed forces, she ended her enlistment to attend the University of Arkansas. Shortly after her move to Arkansas, she discovered the need to have an interpreter in the court system. After 2 years pursuing her interpreter's license, Laelan became the first certified interpreter in the nation in 2013. Subsequently, she was appointed by former Governor Mike Beebe to serve on the Arkansas Minority Health Commission. Her official appointment makes her the first Marshall Islander to serve in a state agency capacity. She was reappointed by Governor Asa Hutchinson. She is a recipient of 40 Under 40 Award by Northwest Arkansas Business Journal in 2014. Laelan is the founder of the Arkansas Coalition of Marshallese, ACOM, a not-for-profit organization that is a Marshallese-operated organization and focuses on health leadership, education, and culture. She is now the chief executive director for the organization. Her daily work put in the middle of social services and policy advocacy, especially around Marshallese issues. Her leadership led to recent changes in state laws, and in 2018, Governor Asa Hutchinson signed a resolution that allows Marshallese children to have access to state Medicaid program. Her latest policy work has led to the passing of Bill HB 1488 and HB 1789. Both bills give Marshallese mothers and children protection against human trafficking and adoption schemes. She continuously serves her community by bringing in unique programs to the community that are impactful at a large scale and leading to social changes. Malene is married and a proud mother. She currently is living in Springdale, Arkansas. In her free time, she enjoys spending time with her family. Thank you so much for joining us, Melisa. Next, I would like to introduce Ophelia Watahomigie-Corliss. I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name. She is a member of the Havasupai tribe who has participated in multiple initiatives during her time on tribal council, including advocating to protect the community from uranium mining, bringing national awareness to the tribal digital divide, and bringing high-speed internet to Supai Village. She is actively involved in the intertribal centennial conversations of Grand Canyon National Park and holds 2 bachelor's degrees from the School of Communications at Northern Arizona University. Thank you so much for joining us. Again, thank you all for tuning in this evening. And before we get started, I would like to note that we are all tribal members speaking from our own perspectives and experiences from working within our own communities and others. Thank you. I'd like to also give a brief background for and give context to our dialogue this evening. Excuse me, let me drink some water. The nuclear fuel chain has far-reaching impacts on all aspects of our livelihoods. For Native peoples, we know we have an inherent responsibility to the natural world and to future generations. Our traditional knowledge systems are deep-rooted and are instilled through regenerative relationships with the natural world that have existed since the beginning. as taught through our cosmologies and epistemologies, and have been passed down through blood memory and oral history. The interconnectedness shared between the land and Native peoples has never been teased apart and is still recognized today through our very identities and lifeways and through our languages and ceremonies. This is Native land, and it does not understand the English language. English is foreign, and it cannot heal and restore what has been desecrated and destroyed without Native peoples who know how to speak to the land and provide offerings and prayers in return for all life-giving elements from the natural world. It is an unwavering acknowledgement of what you take and what you give back. It is a balance that requires discipline. It is deep respect, respect for all life, respect for our elders, our children, our communities, our ancestors, our four-legged and winged relatives, all of our relations, respect for our future together. Our people and our homelands have experienced genocide and desecration for over 500 years. The desecration of sacred landscapes from extractive industries like uranium mining has a direct impact on the psyche of Native peoples. This is why you see so many disparities in our communities, everything from alcoholism, substance abuse, diabetes, domestic violence. Native peoples are so connected to our land that we are the land. So when our land is being exploited, it compromises our ability to heal from the land. And it goes back to our deep-rooted regenerative relationships with the natural world. Our ways of healing do not follow Western thought. Instead, it is holistic through the four domains of spiritual, psychological, emotional, and physical existence. Indigenous people link our whole being to our environment. This is why the role of environmental cleanup and the psychological healing should not be taken lightly. This evening, we will be discussing the social and cultural impacts from the nuclear fuel chain on Indigenous communities. So with that, I would like to kick us off with our panelist questions. And we don't have a specific order here, so panelists, you're welcome to answer. Please jump in as you wish. The first question I'd like to put on the table is, and you know what, let's go ahead and start with Melisa. What major uranium or nuclear injustices have occurred on your homelands? You're on mute, Melisa. Sorry, thank you.
Sorry about that. In my culture, I have to tell you what clan I am from before speaking. So I'm going to go ahead and let everyone know, including our friends who are watching this. My clan is Rano. Rano is a royal clan. So you know, we have a lot of ties to the lands as well. And I really like what Talia said about, you know, the connection between the people and the lands, and that connection for me is very important to the world that I came from. But to answer the question, not too many people are aware of the Marshall Islands. So I always feel like I need to let people know where the Marshall Islands are. So the Marshall Islands are located in the North Pacific region. So simply put, it's kind of like the midpoint between the New Zealand and also the Hawaiian Islands. So Marshall Islands had actually gone through four rulers. They were under four rulers. The first one was the Spaniards, the German, Japanese, and then later on, Americans. In fact, the Americans still own 70% of our ocean. So they still somewhat have some ownership on these lands. But after the World War II, the United States occupied the Marshall Islands. These islands really are low-lying, ring-shaped pieces of lands that are formed of corals, and they are surrounded by the deep ocean. So imagine like a small outline of ring-shaped coral outline is very vulnerable very like in the middle of the ocean. So it's very vulnerable to any natural disaster. Um, but anyways, to compete against the Russian power, the Americans decided to select those islands, our lands, as a proving grounds to test their nuclear weapons. And they say because of its isolation and the location, but of course, it goes also back to the lack of power. That if you look at the larger scheme of things, these are very tiny islands, and people do not speak out. You know, um, so the military claimed the land, and they actually claimed that the tests were for the good of the mankind. So they were saying, you know, this is going to be good for all mankind. So they asked the chief. There's a video that's circulating, is very popular on YouTube. I think it's on YouTube still. They were asking the chief to give them permission to use the lands, and they were explaining how this is going to be really good for the mankind in general. But the you can tell that no one really understood what this was. I mean, they didn't understand the consequences. The people had no clue. The chief did not know. If the military did not know the impact that was about to happen, how do you expect the people to know, right? So the people had no clue what was about to happen. But for 12 years, starting in 1946, 67 bombs were detonated on these lands, including the largest one of all kind. And I think it's the first deliverable thermonuclear weapon that was detonated. It's called Castle Bravo. It has the heel of 15 megatons. If you don't know what that is, basically it has 1,000 times the strength of what was dropped on Hiroshima. And you can never, to this day, well, even when I went to college, you can never hear about this. It's not being shared at any, even at educational level, i.e. schools and things like that. So the miscalculation of the power that the Castle Bravo had really set a widespread of the radiation. People saw the nuclear fallout and really thought it was just powder. It was just regular powder, and people played in it. In fact, I have two staff that had direct relatives who saw the fallout powder, and their grandma, grandma and grandpa actually stuck out their tongue to taste this powder, and the powder overtook their lands. It went to their water because the natives were actually using well water, well from water from the well. So the fallout powder really made it to the water. So few of them got sick a few hours later. So you can imagine the impact of what that is. And to this day, the destruction is there. So what happened was that that created a displacement to these folks, and also other things that I will hopefully to share with this audience later on similar questions later on.
Yes. Thank you so much, Melissa. And you're absolutely right. A lot of folks don't know about what happened in the Marshall Islands, and to this day, and how your peoples have been displaced from your homelands. And for instance, there's a large Marshallese community in Arkansas now because of that displacement and because of the contamination of your homelands. So thank you for sharing that, Melissa. Let's go ahead and move on to our next panelist. Len or Ophelia, would either of you like to respond to that? And I'll reiterate the question: what are major uranium or nuclear injustices that have occurred on your homelands?
Okay. I'll go ahead and go. My name is Ophelia Watahomigie-Corliss. I am currently a tribal councilwoman for the Havasupai tribe, but in a couple weeks I will not be, but still and will always be a Havasupai tribal member. So, the injustices that have happened to the Havasupai community. I will quickly state, hi, everybody, that the Havasupai are the only Native American tribe that live at the bottom of the Grand Canyon. I periodically hike down 8 miles from where I park my car to make it down into Havasupai. And it's an 8-mile hike, an 8-mile a horse or donkey ride, or it's either a helicopter ride down into the canyon. And we have been fighting against uranium mining for over 40 years. The Havasupai tribe, we are in Arizona, and our aquifer that we get all of our water from, the Havasupai Creek, that we sustain the entire community of, over 420 individual permanent residents at the bottom of the Grand Canyon. Havasu Creek is our entire lifeblood. That is who we are, the Havasu Baja, people of the blue-green water. We are water. And we are miles down into the Grand Canyon. And you can imagine that the water that we receive, the aquifers that we receive our water from, we have had tested scientifically is hundreds of years old. And our injustice goes up to one of the, and what we consider the lungs, or a very vital part of our creation story, is up at Red Butte. And Red Butte, as it is most commonly known as, within miles of Red Butte is what used to be known as Canyon Mine. They've just recently changed their name to, and maybe someone can help me because very recently, I think it's Pinion Nut Mine now, that they've just changed their name into within the last few weeks. But regardless of what that uranium mine is called, they created their in the 1980s, and you'll hear a four-wheeler go by, excuse me. Just waving at them. Up at Red Butte, within miles, Canyon Mine is a uranium mine, and they've been trying to produce uranium since the 1980s. Their work plan was approved by the state of Arizona in the 1980s without consultation from the Havasupai tribe. Without consultation from the Havasupai tribe on either their traditional cultural property, something that they considered their entire lifeblood. We were absolutely left out. And in the 1980s, that work plan was approved. That work plan was approved that allowed Canyon Mine to be able, or maybe I should call them nuclear fuels, to be able to move in and try to continue to pursue being able to mine uranium. Now, since then, uranium prices have gone up, have gone down, have gone up, and have gone down. But the Havasupai have always been against uranium mining. The place where the uranium mine is, it's 1,400 feet underground. And according to that work plan, they're supposed to put a really thick, you know, like a plastic covering underneath that uranium mine, and that, according to them, is supposed to protect us, the tribe, our entire lifeblood, from contamination of uranium mining. And in the scientific community, they keep trying, and GOSAR in Arizona is a very big proponent for uranium mining. And they keep trying to tell us that uranium mining is safe, that the new mechanisms for uranium mining are just something that you can't combat anymore. In the year 2020, it's the most safest scientific thing that you can do. But guess what? Excuse me. Those are our lockdown. Excuse me, sorry about that. But what they propose for the community is that with the new science of uranium mining, there will be no contamination. There will be no worries for the community. And we just can't believe that. The entire water source for our entire community, our entire lifeblood is based off safety, and that we just can't believe that there's going to be no contamination with uranium mining in the area. Our brothers and sisters, the Navajos, have already gone through so much uranium mining contamination that we continuously question and say that we are not safe. So the Havasupai tribe has continued to pursue a 20-year uranium ban and mining that was created in 2012. The Havasupai tribe has tried to pursue an initiative to protect the Grand Canyon region from any future uranium mining, and that we actually did have a bill passed by the House that we are trying to get passed by the Senate to continually and permanently protect the Grand Canyon region from any future uranium mining. But even and if that is passed, we will still continue to pursue and not allow Canyon Mine, who would be grandfathered in, to continue their uranium mining expeditions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ophelia. Yeah, that's a lot to unpack. A lot going on in the Grand Canyon, and our Havasupai relatives are taking on a lot there. Lynn, would you like to?
Yeah. I mean, I guess a lot of my career until this point, and my graduate work and all of that was really just because of my grandparents and my grandfather. He was a uranium miner in Cove, Arizona. And so he, I think, did that for close to a decade. And, you know, the history of that's pretty gruesome. I mean, just like the lack of protective equipment, the lack of safety concerns for the workers and the communities. He ended up developing silicosis when he was about 40 and had his entirety of his left lung removed. You know, and that's been, you know, something I grew up with. Was just, he was pretty limited in his abilities to collect herbs and do that sort of thing, because he eventually became a medicine man. So I was raised with him, and, you know, the health struggles that he saw. My mom and her siblings were likely exposed to a lot of the uranium dust and stuff that he would bring back on his clothing. We, you know, we're thankfully, you know, no one's gotten seriously sick, but we're still, you know, it's always kind of this thing, it's in the back of the head of, you know, maybe something will happen, and hopefully not. But, you know, in many ways, I saw what was going on in my own community. I also grew up in the place called Shiprock, right next to coal mines and coal power plants and oil and gas development. So I'm a big athlete now, but, you know, I have asthma from that part of life, that time of life when I lived out there. And so that's been something, you know, just one of those legacies I still carry with me. And I got to a point where I just thought there was a better way to do things. I really wanted to figure out this policy thing, and I wanted to figure out the engineering thing, because I saw a lot of power in understanding how those systems and decisions were made, and how those want, you know, basically to turn them against themselves in a way for my own people. So I ended up doing a lot of work at looking at the the impacts of energy resource development and the ways in which these can be addressed in the future. I was working in my own community, which was really great. I ended up working in the Department of Energy, and that was eye-opening. The Department of Energy, a lot of people don't realize that like 2/3 of the budget of the Department of Energy is actually to managing the nuclear stockpile and the legacies associated with it. And so, I got a taste of that and working with, our office was doing much different stuff. Like we had no sort of interaction with the nuclear side, but there was a lot of instances where we go to communities like in Northern Alaska, Wainwright and Point Hope in that area. There's a really great book if you want to learn about some of that history there. It's called Firecracker Boys. But that was one of those instances where I don't think I've been that angry on a work trip in my life, but we went up there and folks were telling us that there was this plan to build a inland harbor in near Point Hope, and they're gonna string together 6 nuclear bombs to blow up a harbor. Ended up not happening, and so they ended up changing the project. This is just so absurd. I'm just laughing because it's just absurd. But they changed the project to like understand what the economic impacts would be on, or the impacts on the health impacts would be on a native community from fallout. And so they brought hundreds of thousands of tons of dirt from a nuclear test site in Nevada and buried it in that area. And basically people, that's their main source of food is from that area. So Point Hope, yeah, I'll type the book into the comments, but Point Hope is now a cancer hotspot. And, much of that dirt has been removed, thankfully, but, there's a whole generation of folks that, basically were constantly exposed to nuclear materials through their food systems. So in my own work and what the things that I was working on is that the way our policy mechanisms are developed, or in many ways don't consider the different pathways that Indigenous peoples have for exposure to toxins. And so that's collecting traditional foods or medicines, or going to places that others don't. In many ways we're exposed to a much higher level than what the policy models say we are. And at the end of the day, models are best guesses, and they're kind of treated with like a lot of I don't know, they're given sort of this divine power, but at the end of the day, it's really defined by the assumptions that you make early on and going in. And so a lot of my work recently, and the things I've done recently around that have been to help elevate Indigenous voices and just to like use the science to support our communities, because I think that's in many ways the more sort of options that we have for information to use at our disposal, the better it will be. But yeah, so Ophelia, you mentioned Paul Gosar. I actually had I testified to Congress and I had a really interesting interaction with him. I don't know if Talia has seen it, but I time checked the guy. I'll say it here. I mean, he's definitely been not the most friendly person to Native issues. And so, but anyways, that's a lot of the work that I do now. And, it's something that's always there. One of the things that I'm seeing more broadly, and I'm kind of on the radar, is a few days ago, one of the Senate subcommittee passed a bill to create a national uranium strategic reserve, and that's concerning. And the other is that in both President Trump and also Biden's plan, there's a lot of work to basically increase nuclear power production, and in one instance is to to support mining companies, on the other instance is to deal with climate change. But again, it's like I kind of worry for my community in the years coming forward about are we going to see a repeat of what's happened over the past few decades?
Yeah, no doubt. I think that's something that we're all kind of mulling over right now. Wow, thank you so much, Len. Thank you all. These are excellent feedback and insights that you all are giving us. Thank you. Let's go ahead and move on to our next question. Excuse me. And I think we'll just keep our little rotation that we got going here. How has the nuclear fuel chain impacted cultural practices and traditional lifeways for your communities?
So I think for us, the impact of the testing really were at a higher magnitude. Number one, it caused a huge displacement to the people. They lost their lands, so they had to relocate them. And even during the process of getting them out of the site, it took forever. So they experienced a lot of the direct hit from the radiation. So displacement was huge. Also, it did affect the food chain. People went through, they were starving because immediately the radiation just killed the animals, the seafood, the animals, and also the sea, which the seafood is really like the water is like the bloodline of survival. So when that happened, to this day, there's certain fish, certain sea life that we cannot eat. As soon as you eat it, you get a swollen face. So the aftermath of that is significant. Also, the land loss that they had experienced as well. And if you were to sit down with survivors, they would tell you that they felt like they had to live all over again. When they moved them out and relocated them, they really went to new places, new islands, which they were not familiar with. So they had to find their ways to learn how to live again. But most important thing is health issues. I think at one point, the Marshall Islands actually was like the top 5 country that had a high rate of cancer cases. So that, we believe that it has a lot to do with what happened from the nuclear testing. A lot of thyroid cases. I have three staff that are descendants of survivors, and all 3 of them have thyroid. So you cannot help but to think that has a lot of connection. Another thing that growing up, I also heard a lot of birth defect. Babies, they would come out looking like grapes, or looking like something that you had never seen. So we saw a lot of that. Also, you mentioned other things like the chronic diseases here in Arkansas alone. And this is not just Arkansas, by the way. This is also back in the Marshall Islands. There's a high rate of diabetes. Every time we do like a mass clinic on testing people, over 50% of those adults that walk through, more than likely they will be diagnosed. They will be found that they have high sugar level in their blood. So we're also experiencing that, and cancer as well here in Arkansas. I failed to share that Marshallese people that come to the United States, they come to under this very special status called non-immigrant, which means they are basically lawfully residents of the United States. However, they're not U.S. citizens. So what that does is that it kick them out of like federal programs and things like that. But they do pay same taxes that you and I pay. So what happens when that happens is that there's no really access to healthcare programs. So part of the reason why you're seeing a high health disparity in this community is because just lack of access to certain programs, including the Medicaid. So even later on, generation later, people still suffer these issues. So.
Yeah, absolutely. This stuff, it damages the DNA permanently, and it impacts generations. The half-life of uranium is 4.5 billion years. So this stuff is going to be here for a very long time. And our children are going to be living with the waste and having to deal with these same issues. Len or Ophelia, would you like to respond to that? Again, it's how has the nuclear fuel chain impacted cultural practices and traditional lifeways for your communities?
Hi, everybody. My name is Ophelia Watahomigie-Corliss from the Havasupai tribe. We do currently have trying to be actively mining uranium mine up by one of our traditional cultural properties, Red Butte in Arizona. And as you can imagine, that the tribe's ability to have any say in their Aboriginal lands came well after the approval of this uranium mine. And so a lot of the concerns that have come out from Tribal Council in requesting and actually requesting some studies and some tests from USGS, the United States Geological Survey. They are technically, but not being, they're not being funded by the federal government. They're actually being funded by the tribe to create a testing well, a site, and something that's different from the Canyon Mine, uranium mine. Some of the concerns have been from tribal members, and that we have actually asked for studies and testing for, have been for any contamination that could either happen within the birds, the elk in the area, the deer in the area, and the piñons in the area, which we pick yearly to sustain our livelihood. Currently, it is deer hunting season, and that piñon picking season was just very many weeks ago, and that the community has been concerned about being able to either hunt elk or deer or pick piñons in the area of that mine. And the name of that mine has officially changed to, and thank you to all the people who have been discussing in the chat, is Piñon Plain Mine. And it's been very recently that they decided to change their name. And that nuclear fuels working group, we have technically been fighting against for over 40 years, but only recently has the tribe been willing to ask USGS to try to conduct some surveys, some testing to see if any of that contamination has made it into the plants or the animals of the area. The tribal perspective at the moment is that it's not safe to be picking our traditional medicines, our traditional foods, and to be hunting our traditional foods in the area, which is why we've asked for the extra services from USGS to see if they'd be willing to create some studies around those concerns. Those concerns have been around for a while, but being able to, and for the tribe to actually participate in any regulation that has to do with, right, and I keep calling it Canyon Mine, but for the tribe to be able to be involved with any communication that has to do with Piñon Plain Mine, which that it's now called, it takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of government consultation. And a lot of that stuff is very slow like molasses. You can imagine that the federal government is slow with some of the things that you need to process, and tribal governments are just as slow, and governments themselves are slow. So if you're trying to look for something as social justice, there may be those instances that you can't rely on tribal council, that you have to move forward without them. And you also have to trust that tribal council will fall in line with you. And being on tribal council, I can definitely say that to you as advice, that relying on tribal council or waiting on tribal council to take social action is not always the best course of action. Sometimes action needs to be taken now. Sometimes action has to happen now. And you can't wait for a decision from tribal council. You can't wait for a decision from government. And I also implore you to look within yourselves and to decide if that's something that you need to do. For the Havasupai tribe, we have been trying to work in conjunction with governmental agencies since we've received our traditional cultural property title from the government and that white paper. And the thing that always irks me is that the tribe from the beginning has always been advocating, but has never been heard. And then they want to give us this white paper years later, 25 years later, and they want to claim that we have a voice now. It's pretty ridiculous, and that's not social justice. So if you need to move forward without tribal council, I really implore you to. And if you have the availability to work with other agencies to maybe look into the types of possible contaminations with your water, with your animals, within your elk, within those piñons, I implore you to do so.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Ophelia. Len, would you like to add to that?
I can just speak from personal experience. Of course, there's all the literature about the impacts of uranium on human health, and exposure to things like arsenic is definitely a precursor to developing diabetes. And so, these health impacts that we're not exactly, the science is pointing to that it's obviously not a good thing, but to the extent to which it occurs, it's to be determined. My own community growing up, basically meant the same thing. It's just, we didn't know what was safe and what wasn't. Our access to testing and that sort of thing was limited. The wells that we were feeding our watering our livestock from were contaminated for many years, and that meat was eaten. So I think in many ways that ship has left the port for me. But that's been something that's always there, is like, of course the impacts are there, but then we just we don't necessarily have enough people in our community that can do that testing internally. And I think it's so important that young Native folks get that knowledge, and these are the places where we can really put it to use, is just doing our own science and creating our own data instead of having to rely on the molasses of the federal government. I really appreciated that. And I think at the end of the day, citizen science work is really important, and I think there's a lot of opportunity to leverage that. And people know. I mean, people are that spend their time on the land all the time. I mean, they have the insights, and they can point you to places where you can start testing and doing all that stuff to find more accurate data. And I think that's really, at the end of the day, I see an opportunity, and the silver lining is that we can take control of this, and that's one way I can see how we can make that happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. You guys, yeah, you all brought up some really great points. It does go back to the grassroots, and we can't wait for our tribal councils and tribal governments a lot of times. And sometimes our tribes want these extractive industries in our communities, right? There's that long, dark history that exists still. And so those are also hard conversations that we have to have internally within our own tribal communities, and calling out our own tribal governments when needed. Right. But always continually to, there's a lot of bureaucracy that is also involved in that. So trying to navigate that. And again, amplifying the voices of our tribal communities and those impacts that we're seeing across the board. Thank you all for sharing your input there. We have a few more minutes here, and apologies for getting started late today. But here's a question that I hear quite a lot from different folks when doing the work is, what are some traditional teachings related to natural elements like uranium and land protection from your tribe or community?
In Do you want me to start? Yes?
Mhm.
Okay. So in my case, it's a very, and I love what you said earlier about Western thoughts do not speak to us. We don't understand it. So it's pretty much the same, you know. So in our case, we often, the crisis that we go through, uh, we often silent about it. We don't share it. We have a way to deal with these things. However, we will speak about these things through singing, through songs and celebration and things like that. So we do have a very unique traditional way of teaching what happened to us, of the experience that we're going through. Growing up, I don't remember having to learn about the nuclear crisis that took place on my own lands, my country. So, and that was because, again, we have a very unique way of dealing with crisis, of dealing with things that we're experiencing. Later learned when I went to, well, actually, when I became a leader in Springdale, Arkansas. That's when I kind of became interested. I had interest in this, what happened to our people. So I did a lot of studying on it. So, you know, that just tell you that our people have a very unique way to look at it. But I will say that our government back home has done a lot of raising awareness nationally throughout the world, and they're very vocal about, you know, prohibiting testing on nuclear weapons and things like that. But we're facing a different thing now. Climate change is taking its place. Again, like I said earlier, these are very low-lying coral lands that they are very vulnerable to any kind of natural disaster. So one thing that we're seeing now is the rise of the sea level.
Mhm. Yes, thank you, Melissa. Uh, Len or Ophelia, would you like to add?
Hi, very quickly, the Havasupai tribe, as far as natural elements, we do consider the rocks as medicine. Uh, I guess it might be hard to describe where Havasupai is, but we're very much surrounded by mile-high red rock walls, and behind that, a couple mile-high limestone walls. So behind me was a picture that I took a couple weeks ago to speak about our telecommunications system. But these are the walls that surround us here behind me. And those are considered medicine. And for a lot of people who leave the canyon, sometimes people don't want to leave the canyon. They're not comfortable, and it's because of the medicine walls. And we also have two large standing rock figures that we consider the protectors of the canyon. And if those protectors weren't here, the canyon would close. And those protectors are here to protect us, and these canyon walls are medicine to protect us. Also, in those instances of natural elements, I can say that the tribe has used uranium in the past during times of war. During times of war, we were aware of what was around us, what was able to be used, and what also could be considered a slow killer. And that's the information that I have as far as traditional teachings for the community. I think that Havasupai is protected by the Wigliva. That's what it's called, the two stone protectors of the canyon. Without them, that we wouldn't be here, Wagagapa would close, and that we wouldn't be living here. So the rocks are medicine. I have a pair of earrings that I made out of some rocks, and I think that some people carry them around with them, and it's just a tradition that we try to move forward. They are our protectors. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ophelia. Len, would you like to add?
Yeah. You know, one of the things that I guess the piece that I always carry with me from my grandpa is that anything you do, the land will come back to you, good or bad. So I always try to take that in mind when I didn't follow that suggestion very well when I was in high school. I was kind of a wily high schooler, but you know, as I've gotten older, I've seen the wisdom in his words. But you know, I think in terms of you know, no matter what we do, we're going to have impact. I think that's one of the things that we have to realize and own as human species, but it's how we minimize that impact is really important. And, you know, I think especially looking at, you know, energy policy and the realities that we're going to face with climate change, it's going to be really tough and challenging and very incomplete decisions around what we do, because none of the solutions are a silver bullet by any means. You know, one of the things I always have to remind, you know, we're talking about uranium here, but you know, wind energy, batteries, I mean, those come from mined resources as well. And those are impacting indigenous communities in places like South America and others. And, you know, I think that's one of the things that we have to, you know, just own and realize that we have the opportunity to shape policy in the future, at least in finding more sustainable ways, not just sustainable in the environmental sense, but sustainable in a social sense as well.
Yes, absolutely. Wow, wonderful, wonderful. Thank you all panelists. We are at the top of the hour, and thank you everybody for tuning in this evening. And before we go, I'd like to share a quote. As human beings, it is time to take responsibility for the power of our intelligence and use the power of our intelligence to think coherently. This isn't about whether we can or we can't. This is about whether we will or we won't. This is John Trudell, lines from A Mind Mine, the words of John Trudell. Another great warrior who fought for years on these issues as well. I want to recognize everybody who came before us, everybody who's here now, and everybody who will fight the good fight moving on and moving forward, which will be our children. Thank you all again for coming and tuning in this evening. I am deeply honored and grateful for all the panelists for joining us this evening and sharing your stories, your insights, and your experiences. Absolutely wonderful, and thank you all again. I want to give a shout out to some Pueblo artists who I've been so happy to buy some jewelry from. Angelita Corliss from Kiwa Pueblo. I got a Keiman turquoise Hishi necklace. Got a lot of beautiful jewelry from Kiwa Pueblo. So shout out to some of my Kiwa Pueblo relatives out there. Thank you all so much. Have a great evening. We have one last teach-in next Thursday, so please tune in, 6 p.m. And we will be talking about the economic impacts from the nuclear fuel chain at the next teach-in. Thank you all. Hagoene, ehehe, thank you, and take good care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay, Doug, let's not hang up for a minute.
Let me stop the recording.